vast majority of fantasy leagues have crowned a champion, so congratulations if you're already celebrating a win. But if you're competing for a title this weekend or looking to get in on the action with some DFS lineups, we got you covered. I'm Jorden Hill, and we'll be taking a look at RotoBaller's consensus half PPR rankings ahead of what's sure to be a wild Week 18. We'll discuss some of the most interesting players in Sunday's games, and leave an asterisk next to the players that aren't included in the main slate. Before we get started, please be sure to drop a like on the video, and leave a comment down below with any start-sit dilemmas you're facing. Following a controversial loss to the Cowboys, our number 10 quarterback, Jared Goff, will be looking to lead the Lions to a win over the division rival Vikings. This game is in Detroit. We all know Goff plays much better at home, and Minnesota just gave up a 4 TD performance to Jordan Love last week. The Lions have already secured the division title, and although they could theoretically move up to become the NFC's number 2 seed, this seems pretty unlikely as both the Cowboys and the Eagles would need to lose. Still, head coach Dan Campbell said he intends to play his starters, so expect Goff and Detroit to come out with an aggressive mindset on Sunday. There are no playoff hopes for the 4-12 Cardinals, but Kyler Murray comes in at number 7 with a chance to eliminate the division rival Seahawks from postseason contention. Murray has been solid for fantasy since his return in Week 10, and he looked especially great in last week's surprise win over the Eagles. Seattle just lost at home while giving up 468 yards to the Mason Rudolph-led Steelers, and they've been vulnerable to fantasy QBs all year, especially those with some rushing ability. The Seahawks have surrendered the second most yards on the ground to opposing QBs this season. That said, we can expect a nice showing from Murray, who's priced at a point that makes him a really appealing DFS play. With a win on Sunday, the Cowboys can lock up the number 2 seed, and that's exactly why our number 2 ranked quarterback, Dak Prescott, is suiting up against the Commanders. This is a dream matchup as Washington has surrendered the second most fantasy points to quarterbacks this season. Prescott is obviously one of the very best plays on the slate, but definitely keep in mind that Dallas could opt to pull its starters early if a big lead is established. The Cowboys are nearly favored by 2 scores, but it's hard to imagine them getting this type of lead without Dak tossing a couple touchdowns. We'll kick off our running back rankings with Saquan Barkley, who struggled against the Rams in Week 17. His matchup against the Eagles might look difficult on paper, but Philadelphia has allowed the 3rd most rushing yards and 5th most fantasy points to running backs over the past 4 weeks. The Giants don't have anything to play for, but Barkley will want to end the season on a high note before he seeks out a new contract in free agency this summer. New York's offense has looked functional with Tyrod Taylor under center, and Barkley scored against Philly 2 weeks ago, so it's certainly possible he does so again. We talked about the Cardinals potentially playing spoiler against the Seahawks, but on the other side of the ball, we have an 8-8 Seattle team that is favored on the road in a must-win situation. Kenneth Walker figures to play a big role, and he comes in at number 4. Although Walker hasn't been the most consistent fantasy back this year, this is a matchup he should be able to capitalize on, as Arizona has been dreadful against the run all season. Back in Week 7, Walker was fed 26 carries against the Cardinals, and that resulted in a season high of 105 rushing yards. In another must-win game, the Buccaneers will face off against the Panthers, and we should see a heavy dose of Rachaad White, who's all the way up at number 2. White had a down game last week against the Saints, but otherwise, he's been on a tear for pretty much the entire second half of the season. The Panthers have been almost as bad as the Cardinals at stopping the run, and they've allowed a whopping 25 total touchdowns to running backs. White ran for 84 yards and a score in his last meeting with the Panthers, so it's really no surprise that he's one of the best and most expensive DFS options this week. The 49ers really don't have anything to play for. They've already locked up the NFC's number 1 seed, but Deebo Samuel stated that he and other starters intend to play against the Rams. He comes in at number 12 for us, as there's definitely some risk that he exits early. Samuel is 129 receiving yards away from reaching 1,000 for the second time in his career, and while I'm sure he'd love to join Brandon Ayuk and George Kittle with that milestone this season, he might not be worth his cost in DFS. If you're playing in a fantasy league though, and he's active, you should probably just roll with him. Eagles head coach Nick Sirianni is apparently considering resting his starters, but Philly still has a shot at winning the NFC East, so we should expect them to play. With Devonta Smith likely out due to an ankle injury, A.J. Brown comes in at number 8 against the Giants defense that has surrendered the 5th most fantasy points to receivers this season. Brown was a monster early in the campaign, but has been pretty quiet as of late, and the team has taken notice. OC Brian Johnson said earlier this week that they have to get Brown more involved, so he's an excellent pay-up option, assuming Jalen Hurts and the rest of the first-team offense is active. The Vikings will need a lot of help in Week 18 to make the playoffs, but Justin Jefferson only needs 118 yards to hit 1,000 for a 4th straight year. With Nick Mullins back in as starting quarterback, we like his chances of doing so. Mullins just started against the Lions 2 weeks ago and threw for 411 yards, with Jefferson accounting for 141 of them. This Detroit secondary has allowed the 4th most yards to receivers this season, so expect a motivated Jefferson to feast in this contest. A team we haven't mentioned at all so far is the New Orleans Saints, who need to win against the Falcons to have any shot at making the playoffs. With Alvin Kamara questionable to suit up with an ankle injury, our number 11 tight end, Tamm Hill, becomes an interesting option. Atlanta has been vulnerable to tight ends this year, and although we shouldn't expect a lot of receiving usage for Hill, it's worth mentioning that he had 2 receptions for 55 yards against the Falcons in Week 12. If Kamara is indeed out, Hill will probably get some valuable touches on the ground, putting him very much in play for DFS. Moving up 2 spots, we have Tucker Kraft, who has filled in admirably for the injured Luke Musgrave. He's recorded at least 4 receptions for 40 yards in 4 consecutive contests, and has a solid matchup on tap against the Chicago Bears. Jordan Love has been lights out recently, and the Packers can secure a playoff berth with a win on Sunday. Unfortunately, they may have to do so without Musgrave, Christian Watson, and Jayden Reed, who are all questionable as of Thursday. Keep an eye on Green Bay's injury report, but right now, Kraft looks like a great cheap option. At this point, it's pretty hard to defend our number 3 tight end, Travis Kelce, who was a massive bust throughout the fantasy playoffs. We don't know who all the Chiefs intend to start against the Chargers, but we do know that Patrick Mahomes will be resting, as Kansas City is already locked into the AFC's 3 seed. Kelce is only 16 yards away from reaching 1,000 yards for an 8th straight season, so he's very likely to meet this number if active. This is obviously a great matchup against a weak Chargers defense, which is why he seems appealing for fantasy, but he's extremely risky at his DFS price tag. Hope you guys enjoyed. Please don't forget to subscribe to RotoBaller for more awesome fantasy sports content that'll help you win big in 2024. Thanks so much for tuning in, and best of luck in Week 18.